Welcome to the Know Your Legacy podcast. I'm your host, Vipul Basania, and today's guest is Greg Kerr. Greg worked for the US government in the Department of Defense for a number of years before moving on to become an entrepreneur, podcast host, and an award-winning writer. He's a man of many talents and solving problems around the world. Greg, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks, man. No, and I appreciate your work, and I want to thank you for your work, just setting out the intention of self-improvement and self-mastery. And some of your guests, give some really good insights and highlights into like allowing people to examine themselves. I know Caleb Maddox, and I saw that he was on your show, and I'm like, all right, cool. This is a good vibe to go on to. And then I also saw too, what was it? The doc talking about willpower not being relevant in your self-improvement. And I was like, I had a doc once tell me, like, you can't white knuckle human behavior anymore. Like right now we have some real techniques and ways of changing human behavior. And what you're setting out into the universe is like challenging people to change behavior, because we've been so conditioned that our behavior is so tied to our genetics and there's not much choice in it. But you're showing that you can systematically change behavior and improve people's lives. So I appreciate and applaud the work that you're doing with the show.
No, thank you so much. Yeah, and it's most definitely true. Like, I think there's so many stories and examples of people around the world, most of the time, like unsung heroes that we don't really get told about through the media, like through stuff that we're consuming. We don't really hear about these people, but they have physically changed their lives through setting out an intention for what they wanted, regardless of where they started or where they came from or what they were told was possible. And so if I could just shed light on a few of those, such as yourself, and hope that it affects maybe one or two people around the world, then that's the job done, because that's going to have a domino effect on what they do and what someone sees them do,
Right. No, and I appreciate it too, because I sit in there and I see people that are conscious in navigating this world to try to do right, try to be well by their fellow humans. And then I also see that we also foul up and trip up and mess up. And so I always worry about those that aren't walking through life in a conscious manner or conducting business in a conscious manner around the world, and the difficult part about it is they'll constantly have those reminders. And then too, this is an interesting thing, because I really like your accent too. That was another compliment I was going to give you, is like, I could listen to you all the time, because I've never heard in my life, oh, your American accent is great. But that British accent. But here's a good difference between Brits and Americans, and I guess in a greater extent, Europeans and Americans, and this was explained to me by an Austrian, that it's America's greatness is our ability to fail. And that's one of the things we offer the world, is this idea that, hey, as we're going through, we're progressing things, in the human condition. In the United States, you can fail and redefine and keep moving forward. In Europe, there's a real prescription on how things are done. And maybe this also ties into with the value of your podcast, where you're then also coming from a culture that does not see innovation and improvement. There's a way to do things in the British way, the good, proper British way, and you have to follow that recipe. But now we're finding that there's different recipes and different avenues to achieving success. And there's also different successes, right? It's not a bottom line success world anymore. We're also looking at happiness. And you can have all the money in your life, where people are starting to learn that lesson, that you can hoard all that money you want, but if you're not happy, it's pretty worthless.
Most definitely. I think there's that tradition around the world, I guess, wherever you look, regardless of, the walk of life that you're looking at. Everyone has that set path from the generations before them, or just the culture fit at the time, or the restrictions in the culture at the time. And most people find it difficult to come out of that. One, because of like our psychological makeup, and then two, because they don't realize that there is anything else out there that they can do until they start listening to other people or consuming content outside of the day-to-day, that they realize actually this is what's going on around the world. And that's why I like your perspective, and I'm interested to share that, because you've been around the world, you've spent time with different tribes of people, different people from walks of life, and so you're coming at the world and showing up every day with an open mind, with a mixed perspective that's slightly different than the average person's.
No, yeah, absolutely. And it's been this, I guess, to let viewers understand, give it 2 minutes. got a lot of this time in conflict, right? Like I was in the Marines here in the United States, so I participated in the invasion of Iraq. I later returned as a civilian under the Pentagon. I also throw in like 3 tours in Afghanistan. I was in Egypt for the revolution there. I've been in Israel for 2 conflicts in Gaza. You know, you name it, I was there for Uncle Sam. And kind of left kind of like a disgruntled Pentagon employee kind of saying, hey, we can do better. You know, government forces where they meet and interact with the people, it has to be kind of a moment that matters. I used to steal Disney's business model, be like, hey, you're in Afghanistan, like you have to make moments that matter, or at least moments that aren't destructive and horrible for the Afghan people, you know. And then trying to say, hey, if Disney can turn central swamps of Florida into the most vacation spot on the planet, then, you know, the Afghan government can provide some kind of governance models for its people. So that's where I was kind of like, I was this counterflow guy at the Pentagon, kind of looking at cooperation and looking at networks and systems and not individual terrorists and bomb makers and all these people that ended up at the end of the day, in my view, were just like poor 7th century farmers, really confused at the geopolitics that fell in their lap, and, you know, kind of having empathy that they were the mission. You know, the mission wasn't the American flag or anything, like the people were the mission. So me and a couple guys got out and we started working kind of in that theme to say, hey, we're going to help government forces get along in conflict zones, because there's just a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of it's economics. You know, I don't even think there's a Taliban. You know, there's just a bunch of people that are standing to lose in a new political system. And so they fight to keep the old one. And so when you see it through that lens, it's easier to craft policy and tactics to kind of achieve those goals. You don't achieve them by just killing those people, arresting them for 15 years. You know, you're not solving any problems. You're causing more problems than not, you know, not even treating the symptoms that you're trying to treat. So it was that kind of like clumsiness that we were trying to counter. And I did my, you know, first year out of the Pentagon in Colombia, working in that conflict and that peace process. And then the Ebola outbreak hit in West Africa. And I got, you know, started working contracts there to build Ebola treatment units deep in the bush of Liberia, which is a really interesting country in West Africa that was kind of like US's first and only kind of colony or colonization effort in West Africa. And so we went over there for the Ebola crisis, and I had never had my world shook even harder than anything else I had done in my life. People were dying in the streets. I was there on my own and not as a government employee, so I didn't have big Uncle Sam's logistics and help and cavalry coming behind me. And so we muscled through that as a small company, and then we ended up picking up some power grids to work on from USAID and the US Embassy, and these power grids started running off renewable resources. And so I came back to the States because, like, we started building grid after grid, and all of them were really having difficulties integrating with the society in really rural Africa. You know, imagine that these, you know, poor simple farmers can't run a utility, and we hand them this like brand new technology, and they go, "Hey, have fun with it, guys." And so I've been looking for kind of like new technical solutions or social solutions to kind of making these grids work in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's where I kind of started getting introduced cryptocurrency, blockchain, and then a next evolution into mesh networks and meta currency or meta value systems. And so if Bitcoin and Ripple and all those cryptocurrencies are kind of like a digital recreation of money, there's a new system coming out, a new way of creating apps, that app architecture allows us to create reward systems that you can now make like kind of meta value or capture value within an app system that kind of benefits the world. So we're working first on energy. So the more energy you create that energy locally. It's handled through our app, and you can create a cryptocurrency by say, hey, using a toilet in a waste of energy cycle. You know, and then you start seeing the dynamics of like when you have a tool like that can incentivize behavior. You know, I know it doesn't sound great, but half the planet doesn't use a toilet, and think of all the problems stemming from that. How much the human capacity is just sapped globally because of toilets. So like, and so instead of, maybe we're not building the best toilet out there, but I'm building maybe an economic system that flips the time or flips the whole program in there that having toilets in most humans' hands is now the most profitable endeavor. Right. And so now that market creates a strong wave of people going, these aren't toilets, these are mining utensils because you're mining energy from the human digestive system. Right. So it's just kind of, you're taking a little oblique twist to the dynamic that exists, and then, putting a new economic force on saving or restoring the climate and the planet. So that's kind of, I guess I kind of morphed in, my past in working in conflict, and then kind of getting to this point to say, hey, conflict is basically just the lack of rules or inefficient rule systems. And now through code and through apps, we can send into the world new types of governing rule systems. And these will challenge bad old ones, right? ISIS is proving that bad systems are better than no systems. So we can counter ISIS rule with algorithms and apps and not bombs, right? ISIS doesn't get to control energy production. They don't get to control water usage. They don't get to control soil reclamation. Like all these things can be handled outside of their care, which really saps away from their center of gravity. And that's true of any centralized organization, right? You can even extend that to the bad parts of the United States government. You would say that, we're over-centralized, and to the point that if we put the power back into the people, where they're governing their own power, they're governing and trading their own waste and all these different things, then there's no real need for that national identity, right? Your resources in your life are taken care of at the local level. I think that's something that politically everybody on the spectrum here in the United States and even divided Europe, self-determination, better allocation and management of resources is something everybody can go for. So I can see a new political wave of technocrat that's demanding transparency, demanding that our resources be managed in a computer-aided manner. And these are the things that are going to help cooperation down the road, that are going to help reverse climate change, that are going to create new economies of abundance and allow, we can address poverty and climate change, I think, in the same swoop.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot there that you're working on, different facets of what's going on around the world at the moment. And I think it's for someone that's listening to or plugging into this type of world for the first time in terms of what's going on in that area. If we just take it back, I guess to how you actually got started working in the government, and what those first few, I guess, important memories were for you that you'd want to share in terms of the work that you were doing.
Yeah. So this comes in from being kind of a social scientist culturalist, but how did I get there? And it started with, I dropped out of college. I never felt more insignificant than on a college campus. I used to do this thing. I used to lay in my dorm room, and I'd do that movie thing where I'm like in my bed, in my dorm room, in the dorm, on the campus, and kind of go out, and I felt so small and insignificant. And I used to tell, I don't know if this legend's true, but my mom used to tell me that John F. Kennedy's mother told him, don't try to be an actor, someone who pretends to do things, actually do them. And that's what led him to a life of the presidency. Very simplified philosophy, but I always kind of took that as a life lesson, is like not to look to be or idolize those who are pretending, but to go out and do. So I dropped out of school and I moved to the Amazon of Brazil for a few years. And that's where I picked up Portuguese. I was really good with the language. Like one of the best compliments I got leaving there was like, somebody was like, hey man, be proud to be Brazilian. You're not American. Stop telling people you're American. That's, and I was like, oh, nice. I did it, And so then I joined, got back to the States, and instead of going back to school, I knew the military had linguists. And so I was like, I got a penchant for language, and let me just pursue language. I joined the military to be a linguist, and they sent me to the most beautiful place on the planet, Monterey, California. And being fluent Portuguese speaker, they put me in Spanish, and I just enjoyed my time in Monterey and got great grades and test scores in Spanish. And that's kind of where it went. And then I started like evolving, like the government tests you a lot when you have foreign language. And I was I was in a post 9/11 intelligence community. So they were like really big on foreign language. So I started getting paid to learn foreign languages. And so I started like then testing in Spanish, French, Italian, the second form of Portuguese, so I started accumulating. So on paper with the government, I had all these like foreign language capabilities that they would pay me. So that's kind of how I got into understanding culture and seeing, you know, it was through language, seeing how people communicate and seeing how like religious influence and the different types of influences come in on culture. And it wasn't apparent to me. It's like, I learned in Portuguese that the word to fast is jejuar. And then the first meal of the day is de jejum. So the unfasting, you know, was the first meal of the day. And I was like, oh, how cute. Look at religion's influence, very Catholic, that you call your first meal of the day, you know, the end of the fast. We just have breakfast. Break the fast. I didn't even put it in. Then I realized that there was this whole mystery of language and culture and, you know, causality on how these words were then used in our vernacular. And it became an interest to me. And then that kind of helped me too. You know, when I started going into Iraq and Afghanistan, I started doing things that helped me empathize. I started reading a lot about the American Revolution because I wanted to understand what it was to be an insurgent in a culturally acceptable manner. See, I culturally want George Washington, Nathaniel Greene, all those heroes of the Revolutionary War to be these great guys, just like in Iraq and Afghanistan, Zarqawi, or, you know, anybody else. You know, you're like, hey, these were the guys fighting this big global, you know, invader. And so I started using my empathy skills on that way, you know, within these conflict zones to kind of see how it was to be as the people. And that led me to start writing when I was in the government. You know, I'd go out and I'd do this whole series. Like I did a citizen series in Afghanistan. And I would travel to a little like district and I would interview all the shopkeepers and the people, and I'd write a first person narrative on what it was to be a person in that area and how I viewed government forces, how I viewed international forces. And, you know, half the people in Afghanistan were like, when are you going back to DC, you hippie? And then the other half would be like, I never even thought of the perspective of the people. And you're just sitting there just like we've been here for 12 years and you never even thought. I wonder how the people see us, you know, and I want to put myself in their shoes. So yeah, that's where my interest in culture and understanding, and then seeing on the battlefield where a lot of violence and a lot of things were literally just miscommunication. And that extended into Ebola, right? Like more than a human host, you need chaos for Ebola to exist. And so when you look at a place like Liberia, where there's no public health, you know, there's no public sewage, you know, there are all these chaos elements that lead to something like Ebola being able to catch on, then you start seeing through systems, and these systems that are broken. And then I just started, you know, and then along these things, you start meeting people. And I've met every personality archetype in Brazil or Africa. And then you're, oh man, everybody's the same. It's the context that's different. And then it's actually interesting to examine those contextual differences. But if you start thinking about it, like our IQs are pretty like well distributed as a species. So there's 143 IQs in Brooklyn or in, you know, Monrovia. But, you know, that 143 IQ maybe didn't get the nutrition early in life that the 143 IQ that was organized in Manhattan got, you know. And so then you start looking at all these things, like how can we build systems that foster this human capacity? And so that's where guns and bombs and force, unfortunately, they actually work. That's the bad part. Violence has a historical precedence of working. And mass slaughter achieves peace, you know. So it's the dreamers that say, hey, if we culturally craft policy to best serve the people, and that needs nuanced data about the people, you know, without these divisions, you know, if you look at it, like we need to know what Latino girls aged 13 to 17 in Milwaukee in the United States, we need to know what their problems and challenges are so we can craft policy to help them be best, right? So that's a systems approach. Vice going, oh, individuals just need to be better. You're like, well, that's once again, willpower is, you know, obsolete. You can't white knuckle good behavior in a society and just say, oh, values should be better. You know, they need better systems. So that's where we're coming in from.
Most definitely. I think because every individual is different, like in terms of the problems they're facing or what they're going through, because environmentally and where they were growing up was different. And so you can't, it's not one size fits all when it comes to solutions. It has to be crafted, as you said, based on age, sex, race, everything, because those things, I guess, will differ from person to person, and so the solution will naturally need to differ. So it helps that.
And it's a data-driven approach, right? Like you're looking at data-driven problem solving, vice this kind of like relying on the emotions of rich people. So I remember once somebody was inviting me, or on the periphery, you know, some dinner for the future of philanthropy, and I'm like, I hope philanthropy has no future. I hope we can build better global systems to the point that we tell our grandchildren, like, hey, there was a time that if humans were in need, they had to depend on the whims of the people that had. And that hopefully that blows their mind. Like, what? The system didn't provide for, like, you know, like, and I know that sounds kind of worry, but no, there can be global systems that are fair and transparent. And you know, apps are going to be them, and these things are going to govern things and take it out of the centralized authority's hands and needs, and you're just going to see a new level of reduction in conflict. Just like we say, my grandparents, both of them, my grandfathers landed, one in Italy and one in Normandy, and they invaded Europe. And so a lot of, you know, we glorify that problem solving, but it was really destructive problem solving, but it was still in living memory. And we've come this far. You know, the Western Hemisphere is just about devoid of official conflict. I fought the Iraqi army, which makes me very few soldiers on the planet left that have engaged in state-on-state warfare. We should be proud of that, and I should be ashamed of as a participant, hopefully one of the last participants on state warfare. And so if we look at, it's these better accountability systems, a stronger global media, more eyes on, you know, observation changes the state of the observed. The human condition is more observed now than ever. So of course we're actually better to each other.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think I want to get into the nuances of the data work that you're doing, the apps and cryptocurrency, because that's where a lot of the talk is happening now. But just before I do, I think there's not many people that get a chance to speak to soldiers or people that have been in the Marines, like from a first person perspective. Like we watch it in movies, American Sniper, and you've got like, you know, The Lone Survivor and all of these stories that people have heard. But I guess from your point of view, like what was it like as a, you know, person from your background and from your perspective, going there on that soil and spending time there, like in terms of like the emotions that you brought back, some of the memories that you had, etc.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, because I was able to progress over 5 tours of Iraq, Afghanistan. Then I can also count, like I said, 2 tours of Israeli conflicts. I wasn't a combatant in that, but I was still running from, you know, from rocket fire or stuff like that. And so I had this almost combat maturity, where I remember my first tour in Iraq in the invasion, like some guy like pops around a corner, starts shooting at us, and I didn't take cover. I didn't shoot back. I literally looked at him, and my first and only thought was, I'm the nicest person you'll meet. Why would you want to kill me? I totally was out of context that we were invading his land. And I was kind of deceived under this whole liberation thing. You know, I was 22 years old. You know, I was stuck in a lot of paradigms in that moment. And so, you know, from going from that experience to, you know, I was living with Navy SEALs in an Afghan village for 6 months. You know, I had this opportunity to go through it. And I had some identity crisis, like in my red coat, right? Like I felt like this, like a British, like invader and colonialist. You know, and then kind of saw myself as that every time I would step out of a vehicle and go on patrol. You know, and just like, man, I'm a colonialist in foreign land with people that are not international terrorists. These are poor farm, you know, like going through that whole thing. And then, you know, now I'm just trying to use that understanding of conflict to better the world, right? So that progression is not only I was able to digest the conflict and able to process it. And that's why I don't feel like I have a lot of the problems that a lot of vets have. I did work with a neuroscientist. I do neurofeedback. I do stress inoculation measures. I work on my sleep, you know, a lot of like measures to make sure that my decision-making and risk-taking state peak. So I didn't want all this time in conflict to make me into a kind of like a coward. Like, you know, like, man, if I can take risks, like, yeah, let's apply that to other things. And so now I've been taking risks in business. I've been taking risks in tech, and I'm just applying like what made me walk out on those patrols, and I'm applying it now to going into boardrooms or asking for help or asking for money or doing these different things in business.
Yeah, it definitely, because it brings out, I guess, a certain level of attitude, and it builds a certain type of character, and then you can use those traits in other areas of your life, as you just said. So coming out of that, then, I guess two things. One, what was some of the biggest lessons you took away from there in terms of what you learned and what stuck with you? And then why did you decide to transition out from that life into the things you're doing now?
Okay, so there's this like misconception that people in the military are risk takers, and they're actually not. The military is actually a rite of passage for status quo people. So like, that's why they're conservative, right? They're politically conservative. So within those, there's a recipe within conservative culture that says, you're a good, honest citizen, you pay your taxes, you go in the military service, there's your rite of passage, then you get out, then you get married, you procreate, get a mortgage, cut your grass for the rest of your life, right? And that's what military people, that really appeals to them. That's why we all have kids young. That's why we all get married young. There's these values instilled in the class that enter the military. So, and then once you get into the military as a machine will roll over anything. It's the human element within the risk operational calculations that are actually the risk mitigators. So in fact, the human role in the military is to reduce risk. And so military people, that's why you always hear like, hey, they're that filter to go, okay, is CNN going to like this? Is, my superior, that's what the human role is. So when they get out, there's this problem. There's this misconception that like military people are these big risk takers. I've seen them like all fail in entrepreneurship. That's maybe why I explained some of the reason why they get kind of like hung on a cliff and 22 or killing themselves a day. That you don't have this balanced idea of taking care of yourself, like afterwards. So there's been some struggles within the veteran community that I feel like I've been able to avoid because of this like rebel counterflow view that I've been trying to foster. So it wasn't really what I learned from being in there. Like, yeah, I still fold my clothes, make my bed, I'm gonna show up on time, those types of things. There are those institutional things. But it was also my differences within the system that I really rely on. And that, so when things get tough with me, I go, oh yeah, that's me. That's why I'm not in a cubicle right now. That's why I'm running around risking Ebola. And I got people casting spells on me with machetes and firebomb, like I'm still in the fight, and it's been that counterflow that I didn't learn from them, but I learned on myself by going against that Pentagon culture, going against the grain, advocating for women to be more involved in conflict because they're deconflicted. Those types of frustrations that I couldn't achieve in the government was what I use now to fuel me pushing forward.
Yeah, that's interesting because it goes against a lot of the things that I guess you would assume from watching or reading the content and material that we're shown on a day-to-day basis, because it's not in line with what you just said. And you're talking from a first person's perspective, and that makes sense because everyone is put into, forced to get into a routine of some sort. And I guess then you become comfortable in that routine. And so then that transitions into other areas of your life that you want everything to be routine. And then you don't want to really be uncomfortable in the sense that you don't want to step out of those routines that you've set yourself, which goes against the whole risk-taking element of someone's character. I don't know if I'm right in saying that.
No, yeah, absolutely. And that's why you see like veterans turn into almost like a refugee community where they cluster together little ghettos. And these ghettos are like, oh, we're the veteran and portion of this company and this, that, and the other, because they can't get away from, they can't accept out of these bounds that they need this small unit.
Mm-hmm.
And so they fail to get that amongst their civilian counterparts, I guess, and then they congregate among themselves. Yeah, I haven't had many veterans outside. Like, I don't know, like I said, I'm an entrepreneur, so there aren't many veteran entrepreneurs. And as I examine and go through this, I go, oh yeah, the values systems in the military are not suitable for entrepreneurship. And I think that's where a lot of these efforts to get veterans to be entrepreneurs fail. And I've yet to benefit from one. Like I usually go around like, oh, these guys, they're using this veteran cause as more of a networking thing and a chance to maybe raise some money, because yeah, I've never seen them actually get to do anything for it. You know, I'm like the veteran entrepreneur, and like none of these organizations kind of have any service towards somebody like me. So yeah, I haven't really been able to have many peers on that level or engage on that level. And I kind of like, that's why I kind of distanced myself to say, hey, actually, it was the skills that made me a rebel in that environment that make me a good entrepreneur, not the skills. Like I don't have like high decorations and stuff like that. I'm actually weary. I've written some things like, hey, like if somebody did well in the military, high rank, high reward, stuff like that, like that's really not a good indicator of entrepreneurship. That's how they know how to be a good system person. You know, you might want that person in your organization, but not taking entrepreneurial risks, not, you know, because the value systems around them too, their families aren't set up for that. Like, what, you don't have health insurance?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Their culture would never allow them to take those risks. And they demand, like, I need salary, I need this. And I'm like, well, dude, it's startup, you know, we're going through this. You don't get those things. You know, military people are expecting those types of safety nets.
Most definitely, yes. Well, what would you say is, I guess, one of your more emotional memories from everything that you've gone through now up until the most recent years?
Oh, so Ebola by far. I can't tell you how Liberia affected me. To be in that extreme kind of poverty. I witnessed a couple witch trials while we were there. You know, this kind of like the stories of sacrifice of humans and things like that. And you're like, wow, there were still, you know, there's still humans stuck in some really locked, detrimental paradigms. And so, you know, this is starting to see where you can kind of see where I think we have systems that can do better. I feel like if we started giving direct value paths to Africans, like so many things can shift, you know, if we just allow people to create and make their own contextual value and money. So I think the lasting thing was probably just, you know, people romanticize the struggles of Africa, and like there's this kind of like, you know, especially when there's this like white savior view of people going over to Africa to help and like save it or something like that. I honestly feel it's not me or our group or team, but actually the idea of transparency and code that we now have technology that can overcome poverty. And so as an emotional tie, if I can then address, you know, poverty and climate change at the same time and like reduce climate conflict, I think all of those amalgamated worries and fears and emotions can actually have some sense for me. Right? If an Iraq veteran can help create an app or a system that helps regulate power in the developing world, well, then maybe Iraq had that much sense and value into the world. You know, all those lives and all that effort and all that money and all that, everything that was just lost in that thing. If we can come out with some good and some people come out with it, for me, at least that's how I'm justifying all my participation in those conflicts. Say, hey, maybe I learned something from it and I can now benefit. So yeah, long-winded answer, but yeah, there's a big tie of emotions that I'm just trying to solve, maybe.
So did you start working on the app and on the cryptocurrency side of things and the power grids, etc. as soon as you came out? I think, was it 2012? That's when you came out.
Yeah, first year we went down and we were training women in Colombia with the Colombian military to be on the front lines. And the idea is gender balance really helps reduce human rights violations, right? If you send a platoon of half women, half men into a Colombian village, much less rape and pillage goes on. You know, that's for the idea of balance, right? It's not about this fetish of carrying heavy things long distances in warfare anymore. Right? It's about engaging with the population. So how are you going to engage with women? How are they going to report gender-based violence? Especially in the Colombians are mostly Christian, right? And so you throw the Muslim dynamic into it, you absolutely, government forces need more women in it. And these women don't have to be, you know, kicking in doors and stuff like that. I used to always, when it came to Ebola, like Muslim women got hit hard on Ebola because they had the responsibilities of prepping the bodies, right? So the Liberian National Police didn't really have many Muslim women to engage with the Muslim women. And there's cultural things about having men outside of a family or interact with them, you know, so you're already kind of see, I'm like, I'm not talking about you need like RoboCop women, you know, but, you know, if you found like widowed women in the Muslim community to be police officers, they have less of that purity requirement on them. So they can go around and engage and work professionally with men. So yeah, it's this kind of a clever thing to say, hey, a police force could go out and recruit, you know, Muslim widows to be on the police force so they can engage with the Muslim community in Liberia. And then when Ebola breaks out, you know, there's that distrust between the government and the people. And that also led to the spread because the people didn't listen when the government said, hey, this is real. Because the people said, hey, this is like every other time you just try to get money out of Europe and America, you know. It's kind of, they're kind of right? Like they have every right to have that opinion of the government because the government has failed them. So, so yeah, man, just trying to like.
Yeah, no, I was going to say it's interesting because I guess with a lot of the things that you see, there's a lot more men in the military or involved in that sort of profession. How do you then go about achieving the goal of getting women on board or women a part of that process to help achieve the goals that you're setting out for?
Yeah, a great woman at the Pentagon, one of my mentors, my bosses there, she was a typical thing. Her and her husband both started off at the same time and then kids. And then he started going, keep getting sick. And you're going, you know, like it was this typical thing. And then she pointed out that gender balance is a sign of stability, right? Sweden is more stable than say Afghanistan. And so she said, so that makes this building, you know, frustrated in the Pentagon. She goes, that makes this building so unstable. The fact that the system isn't there. So that like these frustrated women in the DOD, the largest conglomeration on the planet, and the whole system was built for and by penises, right? And so the women that are in that are really struggling. And I always, you know, so seeing that balance is there. So now looking at like global military forces to say, hey, if you start building a group, you know, it starts with recruitment and education in the high school systems on how you get women prepped for the military, get them into the military service, and then men, they start like paying that price through the military of blood on the battlefield, which men have gotten the glory, the risk reward. You know, women need that same path and opportunity. I know I failed in that effort. I told my old partner in that endeavor, I was like, success is us going to a lot of funerals. You know, because if we are creating gender balance within the police and military forces around the world, these women need to pay that price on the front line, hence that reward. And so we will be going. And yeah, I haven't been to one of our, you know, one of the girls who trained or something like that being killed because they're not being utilized because, you know, it's still a difficult effort to kind of convince people that gender balance is a necessity. You know, it's how you're going to engage and win wars and battles in the future. So guerrilla, you know, urban movements, you know, it's not going to be heavy-handed all-male tactics. That's proven to fail, and you're going to have to balance your forces, engage with communities, solve problems, create governance. You know, like these hard, difficult things. And one of the things somebody was asking me how to win in Afghanistan, I said, give the South back to the Taliban and make them govern. They won't have time to blow you up if they had to govern. You know, it's harder to govern. So yeah, I think that they are balancing government systems through like military service for women is a good way because women get those leadership skills. They, you know, it's the military services are always a good way to elevate women. And I think, you know, who is it? Sheryl Sandberg says in her book with Lama Gabowi, when they ask her, you know, what do we do to help you make sure this stuff doesn't happen to you again? She goes, create women leaders. And military and police forces are a good way to create leaders, and women could, you know, so I see that as a ladder for women to get up into government.
That's interesting. So the work that you did in Colombia then, was that with primarily with schools, trying to get them into go down the recruitment path within the military?
No, it was purely down the kind of working on doctrine with the military forces, you know, try to integrate and like create, you have to have that kind of doctrine within a military force that justify a budget. And then it also gets into the cycles of like asking Uncle Sam, you know, because you know, the Colombians, you know, you're like, okay, this is a great program, but let's go to, you know, the Americans get the funding. And then to that appeals, it's an easier sell to American leaders, say, talk about the successes that the women had in our, you know, our forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then talk about how we can transfer that into our partners, so the Colombians and stuff like that. And ultimately, like I said, my objective wasn't the military forces, but honestly, like setting better conditions on the ground, right? Like I'm more of a people for the people, and softening the hammer of the government by putting women in charge, women in the planning cycle, women in the execution cycle, the operation cycle. There's not a feminine brain in that kill chain sometimes in the American military, and maybe we need that balance to, keep things sane. Maybe somebody needs to stamp, say, hey, dropping a bomb from an F-18 on a sheep herder doesn't advance anybody's cause. And the men are failing to bring that perspective.
It's interesting because I think you're with what the work you're doing now, you're almost going to the root cause of some of these issues and being able to work and build infrastructure from the ground up, and providing the infrastructure for these guys to thrive without needing constant help or aid in the future. I don't know if I'm right in saying that.
No, yeah, and honestly, like from gender balance or systems change perspective, right? This isn't, once again, you didn't have a good leader, so things were good for a few years. No, you have good policy, you have a good adaptive system, and those systems are, taking in the input of the population. So that's where it comes in. Military forces have to have women at all levels. And the UN, there's, what is it, 1335 or something like that, UN resolution that like mandates that women be at all levels of justice. And if you think about it, especially in conflict, like that's what kills me, like women in the military, no, it's dangerous. Like, no, because there are women on the battlefield. Half of the World War II casualties were civilians, and we over glorify the violence perpetrators in those conflicts, and completely the human casualties or the civilian casualties are brushed off like they don't matter, but they are the ones that absolutely matter, right? And that's why I feel like, when you say women are on the battlefield, I'm like, women die and suffer on the battlefield more than men in their defenseless, because, like culturally we're keeping weapons out of their hands. We exclude them from getting these skills or understanding. We underrepresent them in these military forces. So they're just like these like liabilities that just get thrown around. So I hate when I hear this, women aren't on the battlefield. Women are all over the battlefield, and then you need more women to protect them. And if you don't know that, then you don't understand modern warfare.
So how long were you in Colombia doing that sort of work before you transitioned into some of the projects you're involved with now?
A year. Yeah, it was totally one of those economic, doing startup stuff, and we're struggling for contract to contract, and then Ebola hit, and somebody like gave me 2 contracts like that just made the economic decision to go, oh, I guess we got to go over here, and that's what took us in. But the money looked big, but no, there's Liberia just bridges break, roads close for 6 months, all kinds of crazy, it's vulnerable operating environment. So the lessons were valuable, but the money isn't there.
So what happens next then? So like from Colombia, where is your next piece of work based?
Yeah. So right now I'm in Atlanta. I'm preparing for an event with the UN SDG, or Sustainable Development Goals Media Zone, here with the Super Bowl, which is the American Football Championship. And we're trying to we're highlighting businesses and leaders that are into impact and helping the UN advance these goals that the entire world has agreed to achieving. One of my bigger events now with working with meta value systems and cryptocurrency is to create a monitoring evaluation program for the UN sustainability goals, right? So what gets measured gets done. And I was just talking actually to a Vice reporter. She goes, oh, I write about the UN's SDGs and how they will be achieved. And I'm like, exactly, because they're goals without any kind of accountability system. So what we're doing is building some kind of meta value system that rewards pursuit of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And that kind of gets into this new idea of smart cities and IoT, where, if you could smart meter, like say you're producing green energy and you can meter and capture that metering, and then you can create a cryptocurrency around what you're producing. And so that's where it's like, wow, maybe we can create a universal basic income for most humans. It's going to be a set of apps on their personal device, staged around the UN's goals of the 17 of them, from everything from life on land to well-being, and so you can measure your pursuit. The individual can measure their pursuit and the goal, UN's goals, and calculate it in a measurable manner. And that's going to be the basic, value around the world for people.
So let's say this all goes successfully and you've launched it and it's building momentum. What should it hopefully look like? Like, what do you see happening with that in terms of day-to-day usage?
No, absolutely. So good question. And it kind of looks like this. So we've always looked for the path out of poverty through land ownership. I own land, therefore I have legal rights. I'm registered with the government. So this idea of like getting people in slums to register, and then they legally exist, and all men will get the land registered. And then you'll have to start the long fight of women getting educated, stuff like that. So I'm like, if we set it at data sovereignty, so now we have ways of building tools that you can grasp your own data. So if you create electricity, that's data you're creating, you're grasping, and you're benefiting from it, right? If you walk your steps, like all these new ways of data and these meta currency systems, these things are going to then provide you a way to like make and maintain your own data. So data sovereignty is going to be the way most humans come out of poverty. So if you're making $1 a day or $2 a day, now you can capture your data and make $5 a day, you automatically become credit worthy, right? So now you're talking about shifting major systems of economies. On top of that, with these apps, you can allow Africans to create and capture value. You can now have an African tax base. A lot of problems with these developing worlds is like people like me have access to political figures because I pay taxes, because and the average African is on an informal economy that doesn't pay taxes, so his political leaders are not subject to them. So if you now create a value system for most humans, and now you change the politics, the political parties and political leaders are now accountable more to their people than to foreigners. Now you're starting to see a shift in like something like Liberia. You're talking about a country of 4 million people, small economy. If we made everybody just go from $4 a day or $2 a day to $4 a day, and it's captured, and then the government starts collecting taxes. Holy crap. I mean, now you're talking about a functioning government. Now you're talking about people getting their resources, infrastructure being built. And this is such an appealing message that even people on the Tea Party I've talked to come and be like, wow, like if Africans can build their own value systems and then build their own infrastructure, not one US tax dollar has to go over there.
So
right? So they can tie into that.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, so from the perspective of the individual, let's say once this all kicks off, they are essentially, if I'm understanding what you're saying, they're going about their day-to-day activity, but because they're collecting the data from what they're doing. Is the value in the fact that because they've collected it, now the government can use it, and so they'll be paid as a result of that.
So think of a closed loop data system. So like the energy part, like you wake up, the sun hits the solar panel, the software registers that it's yours, and your phone is running off of, an energy that was produced for free, right? And you captured that coin energy, and it's managed on your phone, and it's also being negotiated with your toaster and your oven and your car, all those things. And then in a third world convention, just less devices that are shared that value or share you what's being produced. So kind of like, I like to think about it is, how could somebody in the developing world wake up and then create values in line with the UN's goals throughout their day? And then it comes into metering, right? So like in my vision, like if you're using a toilet, that toilet waste can be measured, and it's measured against how much electricity it can make, because we can now take human waste and turn it into electricity. And then stuff like you're going to have little like meters on your shower drain, because the water falling from there will then spin and create electricity enough for the light bulb or something like that. But now the fact that you set the economic conditions that human activity can create value, and we can capture that value, right? Bitcoin proved that humanity can assign value to anything. They did it to computer algorithm, to computer labor. We're just saying, hey, now with smart metering and IoT, smart cities future, we can now meter human activity, and then that human activity has value. And then that value, once in a closed loop system. So like if you're creating energy and you're using it, how you're using it, that's in that data cycle. That value there is then captured by you and not the electric company. So that's where I kind of go through. If you start planning out people's day, how can we create tools that basic human activity has value, because all humans have value, right? And so you're now just like kind of categorizing what value you're creating when, and then digitizing it and doing it. So plastic can be turned into energy or recycled. Now people can earn coins for doing that activity. See what I'm saying? So now we're changing the economics of people's relationship to waste, their own waste, the waste they create, city waste. African cities are no longer dirty. They're overflowing with raw fuel because we have devices that can turn that waste into energy. And so, now that's why I'm saying, that's why I can see a future now where, wow, man, if we can assign value to trash, and poor people have a lot of access to trash. I've even been getting some mileage off kind of going biblical with it, where this is an economy where the last will be first. Because the first will be last, the last will be first, because everyone in San Francisco is going to still sit there and debate whether this works or not. Well, I'm going to go into Nigeria and offer get these on these, millions of phones, and people are going to automatically just start creating value, and they're going to capture that value. And we're going to change the world that way. The poor people are going to change these systems, and not, us. That banks work for us. We don't need really to revolt against a bank. I want to harvest. Yeah,
that's crazy, because it brings the power and the sovereignty back into the individual.
Yeah, and honestly, so I'm kind of looking at too, like I've always been a fan of this guy Cincinnatus, who was this like Roman dude that retired twice, and then they gave him extreme executive power, and both times he didn't use the power to enrich himself. He gave it right back to the people. So I'm trying to demonstrate to a lot of people here in Atlanta, it's going to be a really fun message to go around, to say that we can create political power by giving power back to the people. And any politician that does that will harvest a lot of political power, especially in Africa and the developing world. If you weaponize transparency and say, hey, we're on the blockchain, or we're handling our stuff this way, all monies will be tracked, nothing can be pilfered. Well, you're going to be the landing spot for all the euros and dollars, and then you're taking that, you're transparently transmitting it back into the people. And so the new political power will actually be a just political power, and it will be wielded by people that decentralized, these systems and gave it to the people. So that message is resonating, that there's now tech that actually helps Black people, that helps poor people around the planet, right? As opposed to tech that like creates that divide, right? Get a Peloton and actually you become better because now we have tech that makes you more efficient. You get like it just increases that gap by a tech that goes, hold on, no, we're putting these people in front of the line, and that's where the massive wealth is going to come. If we've aligned people, planet, profit through code, we're supposed to be the wealthiest people by helping the most people on the planet, right? That's going to be we're trying to set the conditions, the economic conditions, that the next billionaires will be the ones that help the most people and restore most of the climate.
Yeah, I love that, because there's a quote, I think it's by Jim Rohn, and he says, or Zig Ziglar, one of the two, and he says, if you help enough people get what they want, you'll get what you want. And
that's a perfect way for like a meta value system.
Yeah, exactly. Because then it just changes your perspective on how to really gain, capture, retain, and increase wealth for yourself. Because so many people think of it as get rich quick schemes, or the next best business, or the next trend, but they're not taking a step back and thinking, what value can I provide the world? And if I can help enough people, then I can actually, I will be paid in return for that. And that light bulb clicked for me when I was reading a book a few years ago, and the guy gave an example of, he was talking about his journey to financial freedom and building an online business. And he gave an example of like actors, actresses, and rappers, etc. And he said, you just think about why they're so wealthy. There probably are a number of reasons, but the number one thing is they're able to scale. Their music, their content, their movies, their TV shows is streamed to millions of people worldwide, and therefore millions of people are paying for it. They're providing a service or a product to you, and because they have access to so many people and so many people resonate with it, they're getting paid now for it. And so if you can, in the same way, provide your product, services, and whatever value offer that you can bring to the table to enough people, the money will come back into your own pocket, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, and that's the whole thing, like a meta value system with these kind of mesh networks. The way we can build these reward systems, it's this new dynamic of regeneration and abundance. And I'm calling this like the next level. What do they call it? Compound interest, right? And Einstein was like, compound is the best thing ever, right? There's a new level of it called regeneration. And in our system, we call it an ever forking protocol, where this idea is we're setting the value on the health of the environment. So as we all pursue that and the environment gets healthier, then that value should go up as well. So we have this ever forking protocol. So once the economy hits a certain level, the economy grows and everybody's wallet's value grows with it, encouraging people to continue to participate. Now, these are economic principles that don't mesh well and don't understand the people that work in a scarcity, and their education is like, no, scarcity creates value. But now with these systems and apps, the more people that work in the app, the more money we make too, right? So if we're all founders of my coin, right, and then people start picking up the app and creating green energy every time they use a toilet, every time the sun shines in Sudan, everybody's making this money, and the more participation. Now, everybody, like in theory, would be like, hey, let's run next door, put a solar panel on you, because the more you guys create, the more value I'm creating too. Now, so that's why you're going to see this new economic incentive for cooperation. And I'm optimistic because I always sit there and I go, hey, whoever can cooperate the most is going to be the most relevant business leaders in the future. So I'm always faced with people with the secure your ideas and this, the old way. And I'm like, you're going to fail, man. As time goes on, you're failing more and more because you're not cooperating, and you're demonstrating to those around you don't know how to cooperate. You don't know how to share information. You're losing more by keeping secrets than you're gaining by not keeping secrets. It killed us in Iraq and Afghanistan. The silos of information and the non-sharing was deadly there. And it's costly in the business world. So I'm trying to break those down and demonstrate to people that, you want to talk, you want to collaborate. The next economy is going to be based on cooperation and not competition.
Yeah, there's so many examples of that, and there's an amazing book called Where Good Ideas Come From, and the author breaks down in terms of the brain, how good ideas are actually formed, and then also gives examples of where things have gone wrong in history, and also in the current day, in terms of why good ideas weren't able to come to life because of the principles he talked about. And one of the interesting things he says is the cooperation piece. And he calls it the adjacent possible, which means when you go to the end of the line, instead of closing yourself off at the end of the line, exploring the next realm is where the ideas are. So, for example, between people, that would be, I'm going to draw the line with me. I'm not going to share my ideas past myself. I'm going to keep it to myself. I'm going to try and create a business plan or a model around the things that I know. But the things that you know are very limited. Your knowledge is limited. If you were to share it with someone, you have no idea of how their knowledge can marry up with your knowledge to create something even greater. And that comes down to the neurons in your brain. And because he was saying the way that you come up with good ideas is by exposing yourself to a vast number of ideas and content, basically, because those ideas come together in the form of neurons in your brain. And the more neurons you can make connect in your brain, the more likely is a new idea is going to be formed.
No, yeah, that's a good one, because it's that exposure. Yeah, it's absolutely. And it's so weird that people feel like things have to happen in a vacuum or they don't own it. Yeah, I remember somebody telling me like, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to take help because I need to own this and do it myself. And I said, here's the secret. Nobody got rich on their own. I hate this idea of self-made man. I was like, there's no, that doesn't even exist. How does that even exist? If you know how the world works, everybody had a help. Everybody had a safety net. Everybody had something. So even if you hear that story or benefited from coincidence and chance, even when you hear that story of janitor to millionaire, there was a lot of coincidence and chance, and he better recognize that. When ego comes in, where these people, I did this and I did that, I'm like, man, no, you didn't. Your education, who your parents are, where you where you were born with zero code. A lot of that played into it. And if you don't recognize that, you don't know how the world works. You don't realize that a lot of your success is just based on your access. And so that's where I think a lot of it kind of like that class comes in, where like I feel like a lot of the wealthy elite misinterpret the source of their success, and they don't recognize that they benefited from a system that is exclusive and geared toward them. Where, then once you recognize it, like, yo, if we just make bigger systems and we can all make money off of it. I'm just saying, it's not a zero sum. Like, get that out of your head. And I know it's hard for people because our education systems and our culture and our media are geared toward, being exclusive in this. It doesn't make sense that these abundant economies can exist, but code is different now. I think that's the big one. Like, I gotta tell people, like, the transparent code is what's different here. And we can now code in justice. And when you code in justice, then you can have things move smoothly. Like, right, an African woman doesn't need money to have legal representation to get justice anymore. We can code in her justice. So what does that mean? What does that mean that now women in those environments can start creating value and lift themselves up? They can start getting credit. They can start, like these are ways of actually moving forward that aren't based on charity. They're based on being able to hyper contextualize value and grab it for them, because all humans create value. So what does that do in human rights, right? When these terrible or hurtful regimes see like vulnerable populations not as like a suck on resource, but actually resource generating. So in 20 years, a warlord won't be massacring women and children. They may be harvesting their information illegally, or something. There'll still be evil, or not evil. There's no evil. There'll still be mismanagement of resources and tools. I'm not naive to think that we're going to solve anything. I'm actually looking forward to see how people manipulate our system.
So, I mean, with your, like, I'm interested to know actually from everything you're talking about. So the experience that you've had working in the Pentagon, and I think you said you did a stint in the CIA or NSA as well.
Well, as a young military member, I was stationed at Fort Meade at the CIA, or the NSA headquarters, sorry.
NSA.
As a Marine,
Yeah. So, I mean, throughout all of that, and then being exposed to a number of issues that you were solving there, and then now coming out into this decade, and the way that you've seen Bitcoin and cryptocurrency take shape, what do you think are some of the, I guess, security challenges around the data and the data sovereignty piece?
Yeah, so of course, centralized systems are going to struggle with something that's decentralized, and that they feel like they can't control until they get a grasp on it, that they'll always point to the nefarious activities that can be performed on that, as if the US dollar isn't snorting cocaine and selling humans hourly. Like, I love this like righteous idea that like the US dollar is a saint, and this new stuff coming out is just so radical, when you're actually, if you look at the cost benefit on the global access, if you allow people to have this value creation tool and you skirt the banks, that's a big one. These banks were created, and here's the other thing, and this is a scary thing about like global racism stuff, is that like in certain ways it's not like they built the banking system going, how do we keep black people out of it? And actually there is a little truth to that, but on the other end too, it was actually more of a like, how do we build something that solves the problems that I'm facing? And if it was like a rich European white guy making, like, he solved his problems. And so these banking systems came up in geared towards certain areas. So it's going to be fun to like kind of work with populations of color to kind of say, hey, the banking system has never really served you, so let's try this alternative. And it's not going to be a hard kind of shift, because you're offering a strong system against a weak system. And so you can outcompete that system's functionality in the developing world. Like I said, San Francisco banks work. New York banks, I mean, that's their home, right? New York City. So convincing New York to go away from their bread and butter is going to be difficult. But convincing, people in Monrovia that there's a better system that you can clean the streets and make money doing it, everybody can, then they're going to take it off. And so once again, if we talk about society or economies of abundance and us as founders, then you're seeking this most profitable kind of engagement, where you're now allowing like every African, every Indian, every Indonesian who uses a toilet, or drinks clean water or something like that. Like, you start mind blowing the amount of money or value you can create in these systems, and how we can transfer those systems, that value, right? We can take all these coins and turn them into US dollars and blah, blah. But here shortly, it's the dollar that's going to be wanting to compete into, these meta value systems. You're going to start creating a global population of people that are in these systems and earn their daily bread off of apps. You know, whether they're playing a game on an app, whether they have their privacy rules on an app going, hey, sell my information to every political party around or keep me private. You know, there's going to be all this data created. People are going to retain that data, and that sovereignty of data is what's going to be the new empowering element, and it's going to lift people out of poverty. You know, what is The Economist is famous for coining that data is the new oil, which makes your personal devices the new oil rigs. And the apps are what's going to collect all that data, right? So that, you know, paint this comparison, you know, all these oil rigs, and then the app is what just harvests all that oil into something that's profitable and usable. So I think, you know, AI and machine learning and machine observation are going to change corporate governance, and that's what's going to help us kind of like solve global problems of trash, poverty, energy, climate restoration. Is machine learning is going to make these or help guide human decision making to these ends, because machines will be able to see, hey, you can't kill your customers. You got to secure your logistics lines by making sure the ports don't sink, you know, things like that. And that's what's going to save. It's not going to be government governance. It'll be corporate governance through apps that allow the most people to organize in an intention, whether it's recycling or cleaning the water or producing more algae or planting more trees. These are going to be the activities that most people can do that are going to restore the climate and allow people to make money doing it.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see a world where everyone is cooperating, collaborating, and creating, rather than destroying it and trying to bring other people back just because that they think that they may not be able to win or succeed.
I would and I want to add a descriptor to what you said. Unknowingly, add that unknowingly cooperate and collaborate in a global cause, because this idea that people need to get woke is done. Like the save the planet idea message is dead. It hasn't worked. Whenever people keep throwing it out, I'm like, you haven't figured this out yet. It's about systems. You want bad people doing good things. You want the child soldier motorcycle boy in Africa recycling, not because he's a good woke person. It's because he's going to make money off of it, you know? And so we just need to build better global systems that people make value, capture the value they create by doing good by the environment, by other people. And that's going to be the characteristic of the next economy. And yeah, it's going to change everything.
So when does this plan to launch? Have you set dates on it, or I don't know how close you guys are to making it live?
Yeah, so we have code, we have the strategy and white paper. We're starting to get the first rounds of funding in. We're working now with the UN on kind of like doing this measuring evaluation. It's in partnership. Like, it's one of the things that you don't need a third authorizing entity, but just the idea that we're kind of like piggybacking off the reach of the UN and the kind of the governance, right? And it's kind of one of those paradoxes where the UN is this centralized authority, right? This big global centralization effort. And then here's the idea of decentralizing that power and giving it out and tracking their goals on an individual level that really is democratizing, even from the UN's perspective, right? Instead of like centralizing global power, it's an idea that we can push that power back into the people through their goals, right? They have goals that are good goals that we've all agreed on, and now we can create a rewards and measuring system that allows everybody to participate in that, and I hope that it becomes the basis of a universal basic income.
Yeah, it's it's an exciting time with the mix of technology, with the mix of ideas, with the mix of where people are going to see the world where it's going to be in about, literally 5 years from now. It's going to be completely different, I think, to what we're seeing today.
And machine learning, I think, is going to really escalate all that for us.
Yeah, I think it's going to cut out a lot of jobs as well, because there's a book, actually, I can't remember the guy's name, but he called it Bullshit Jobs. And he was talking about how these massive corporations have groups of people that literally don't provide any value to the company. Like, with or without them, they would still make the same revenue, the same profit, the same outcomes. these
That's how I
guys
felt
just,
as a government employee.
yeah. Yeah, but it's just crazy because when AI or the right computing power comes into play, it's going to be crazy to see what jobs or what human behavior gets wiped out, and then those people left thinking, actually, what can I do to provide value? What is it that I can do um, to find my purpose, or to make money, or to build a life, now that what I thought was my life is basically done by a computer?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's a good thing to contemplate. And I just kind of sit there and curb it with, your great grandfather would punch you in the face if he knew you made money doing this. Hold on, you sit on your ass and you do this and make money. In the future, it's going to be thumb. I think if you see these versions, like, right, even in ours, like the smart meter, you're using your thumb, you're creating, it's going to come down to that digital value or labor. Digital labor is going to be like that. So just in that rotation, right, there's just like, oh, machines automated to the point that this turns into labor. Now the thumb is going to be labor. And then I guess the next one would be like your eyes moving might be the labor that's being counted. But once again, you're talking about new economies of cooperation and abundance. You're going to have less of a need for a job, right? Your job, like you need a job so you can buy your pay for your electric bill, so you can have power, you can do all these things. Well, what if your waste is doing that? All right, well, then now you have less need for a job, right? And so you're going down, and it's this idea that most things you do in a smart city are going to capture your value and things like that. I honestly think that a lot of things are going to be taken care of for you. And I know this sounds really like communist, but here's the system through code, you're going to earn a coin if you recycle properly, right? So like you're going to earn, your house is going to earn value by the way you clean your kitchen, so you're not going to need this six-figure job. I think that there's going to be a lot of change, but the future has always been better. Like we said, there's less conflict now. The Western Hemisphere is almost void of official conflict. We don't have world wars, things like that, and nobody's going, oh my God, all this innovation, what happened to the jobs? Like, no, we have more jobs now than ever. We just have a bigger population than ever too. So I honestly think that, yeah, it's going to go, it will take off jobs, but then I think there's going to be a new reality where these economies of abundance will have a lot more participation, a lot of basic needs will be met. And we always think of economy as like raising the bar. We think of luxury as a sign of like good economy. But what I'm advocating is raising the ground level, raising the floor of humanity. When we go from $1 to $2 to $4, I'm looking at that, where we raise that bar up there, and then we start solving those problems, and those people don't live, and like that human capacity is sucked and drained out. So I think yeah, there will be a transformation of jobs. I think there's less of an idea we know of a 9 to 5 and pushing through, because like in those things you're actually spending a lot of money to make money. It's an inefficiency. So the economies of the future, right? You're making all this money, or you're making all this value to use a toilet, to take care of your trash, to do this, that, and the other, and then you're working at home, right? So now you're less of a requirement for cars and things like that, more decentralized lifestyles, blah blah blah. And then I think that, yeah, you can make money moving your fingers more and more from your home without a commute, and then you'll have less of a demand. You look at elements of the shared economy, housing is changing to be smaller, more efficient. All these things are starting to come along where, yeah, sure, jobs will go away, but you'll have less of a need for one. A lot of your basic needs, your power, your water, all these things will be taken care of. And then two, your healthcare is better because you're eating better, because you're producing better electricity, and you live in a cleaner environment. So a lot of dynamics will shift, and that'll soften that hit. Or actually, I don't even think it's going to be hit. I think the future is going to look better, and it always does look better. And even with the points where we point out where it's worse, that's great, because that's data, and that's data that we weren't looking at 20, 50 years ago. But we have more observation of the human condition, and observation changes the status. So the more that and that's part of what we're doing too with these cryptocurrencies, is what we're trying to do is monitor and observe human behavior. And not in a big brother way, but in a closed loop data cycle, right? You create green energy, and the back of your cell phone is a solar panel. You create that energy. Yeah, we know that energy was created by your phone, you know, like by your account because you're in that coin. So I don't know how anybody's really going to, you know, manipulate that too hard to be a totalitarian or bring upon tyranny, you know.
Yeah,
But
I was gonna say, because I think the idea of shared economy, you mentioned that in passing, but I think that's fundamentally one of the reasons why Uber and Airbnb and companies like that are thriving so much, because there's less of a need for cars and hotels and things like that, because people are recycling or reusing their existing resources for the benefit of others. And I think,
really good example of things happening now where it's like, oh, people don't need retirements, just give up a bedroom. You know, there's your retirement plan. Good thing you saved all those years, and then now all you got to do is like put some stranger in your basement every, you know, like, and then you could, you know, retire comfortably or stuff like that. Yeah, you're right. So that's the point. Yeah, labor's changing. Yeah, all those things. So yeah, maybe yeah, there you go. Jobs program for the old people, where they're like, yeah, you spent all this time building security, sell that security in your later years by giving people a comfortable home to sleep in for, you know, that type of stuff.
yeah, exactly. No, it makes sense. So I guess before we wrap up into the final few questions, I don't know if you can share or give some insight into some of the things that you may have seen being on the other side, so to speak, that we as civilians don't get to see, or are limited to understanding or seeing because we're only fed certain types of media. So any of your experiences that you feel like, you know what, as a civilian, this is probably not something that everyone knows.
Okay, yeah. When you look at government systems, just know that there's a multiple voices within those systems, whether it's in Egypt or Israel or the United States. Like, I really did learn that there's varying perspectives, and then that, you know, the foreign policy comes out, or whatever policy comes out of government is kind of like there's at least some kind of debate in there. So imagine, you know, somebody's in the Russian government going, you know what, guys, for the stability of long-term things, we probably shouldn't mess in their elections or something, you know, like there's a counter thought usually for the prevailing thought. And so I think watching and seeing this big lumbering organizations struggle with, you know, data, multi-personalities, you know, all these things. I saw, you know, 7th century farmers just really trip up the most modern and mechanized military on the planet, which you as a Brit, I mean, the Brits suffered from that across, you know, and we have the best military and everybody beats us up, you know, and so, yeah, I think that was kind of like a lot of my observation within the government, you know, was just kind of like seeing some of the paper tigerness to those big institutions, seeing what motivates bureaucrats. You know, it's different from a profit-driven organization. A lot of ego and profit-driven. Like, these organizations just have different priorities and value sets. So yeah, no, it's a good question, and yeah, it really fed into my systems view of solutions, and to be part of the biggest like organization on the planet. Of course, I come out with, you know, like, hey, you know, maybe bureaucracies aren't the way problems are going to get solved. They did solve something in their time, right? The British Empire did create a lot of bureaucracies that helped institutionalize and create order and things like that. That's the pro-colonial like argument, right? And now I'm just saying that instead of bureaucracies, apps and computer code are the more efficient way of like organizing humans and getting things done on a global level.
Yeah, most definitely. So, I mean, just to get into the final few questions then, with everything that you've seen, heard, and experienced up until now, is there anything different you would say to the 18-year-old Greg? And if there's anything you would advise or speak to when it comes to like an 18 to 20-year-old, like someone who's at that age?
Yes, verbal judo, not verbal karate. I was a combative, you know, these frustrations and this counter view created conflict, and I fought and was frustrated there. And when I should have been fostering cooperation through leadership and example and handling difficulties and not losing my, you know, those types of things. Like, I was like almost that, you know, frustrated government employee, you know, dealing in high complex things. And I think I could have done a better job of keeping calm, keeping cool, and getting my influence into something in a more tactful manner.
So you're saying, instead of basically falling back on violence to solve your problems, or being physical. Do it through verbal communication and cooperation.
Yeah. Once again, and it always worked for me when I did do it, and whenever I didn't do it, it didn't work. And it's embarrassing to go through how long it took me to learn those lessons.
So the second question is, if there's any statement that you could write from yourself that would go in a time capsule for generations from now to read, what would that one statement be?
Oh, a statement that I would sit there and hopefully you're happy. Because once again, the largest thing, everything I've done in my life, it's not those individual outputted acts. It's the idea that every morning hopefully I'm pleasant to be around, and I'm happy and smiling, and the true measure of success, once again, is just being happy. And
quick side question, since you mentioned that, because you've seen and experienced so many things from around the world, what is your definition of happiness?
Ooh, okay. Definition of happiness. Once again, it comes into one of these like lack of requirements, right? You have no attachments to anything, almost kind of in a Buddhist way. And so, I think it's better than that when you kind of like realize that the universe is, you're not really that important, but you're also the most important thing in the universe. Nothing is, personal against you. And I kind of felt that, I was like, rolling through southern Iraq as a 22-year-old, thinking about the millions of people that had died there through Mesopotamia, going, oh, if I die here, I am not special. I am just like a bunch of other people that have, human beings that have died in this little area, So I just started realizing how insignificant I was. And when you realize how insignificant you are, it's hard to take anything too personal. So people can call me what they want, and you're just like, yeah, you're kind of right,
Yeah, no, you're right, because I've adapted that view over time as well. I'm still adapting it, but I mean, you just become less immune when you see the bigger picture. Like you I guess over time, through the things that you consume and the way that your psychology changes, you naturally start to take a distance from all of that stuff. As you said, like the stuff you're thinking about in college, coming full circle now, the way you thought about things in college, like going up and up and up, like when you start thinking about things from that perspective, you don't take anything too seriously, because it's just like, well, I'm not going to be here anyway, just like you. And there's actually a really good quote that I read from, it was from a monk or from a priest, or I can't remember exactly. I'll try and find it for you. But he said something so amazing that I had to save it. And he said, we're all just walking each other home. And and that got me thinking, because it's like, well, if we're all going to the same damn place, like, why don't you just make the experience enjoyable along the way and collaborate and communicate as you've just been expressing through the ideas that you've got?
There you go. Yeah. The goal isn't hoarding cash. The goal is kind of like a grander thing, and we're all on it together. I think I learned that lesson. I was in the Egyptian Museum of Antiquities, and here's this like priceless works of like the human accomplishment, and these 2,000-year-old statues leaning up and stacked against each other. Like it's a great museum for the content, horrible museum for its like kind of like organization. And I sat there and I'm like, man, 2,000 years ago, this guy was so important that somebody built this huge thing. And here it is, just like leaning up against some other really important guy that I'll never match his importance. And here I am. I could care, like who cares? So that's where it kind of comes. I remember that realization, like running through there, like, man, I am so insignificant. So why even get embarrassed, when bad things happen, because nobody cares really.
Yeah, most definitely. So with everything that you've gone through, and like, the long, healthy life that you're going to live for a number of years to come, what's the legacy you want to leave behind?
Man, my legacy. Yeah, I honestly, I think really the big one is allowing people to capture their own value. And I think that's going to shift the human condition when people see that economic condition. It's weird that it's economics, but it's almost like Taoist and Buddhist to say we're all connected. Yeah, we're all connected, and here's the data showing it. You know, like, here's the economy that shows how we're all connected, because we set the economy around the biosphere, and we're all connected to the biosphere. And when you put it into those economic and digital terms, you kind of understand how humanity is connected.
Yeah, no, I love that, man. I love the work that you're doing, and I'm sure people are excited just hearing about this. So where can people follow you and follow your journey, and just to find out more about the things that you're doing?
Okay. Yeah. I'm gonna start a new Twitter. I haven't done a Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn, and that's where my big professional following is. I have about 25,000 followers on LinkedIn, where I pass some of my notes. I'm also a writer on Hacker Noon, so I can also send you these links there too. So you can contact me on LinkedIn, or read all my writings and podcasts on Hacker Noon.
Amazing. Sounds good, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and insight.
Thank you for your time and the ability to express my ideas.